It's a hard tension. We're sinful people, and we're fallen in a fallen context.
This is Ask Dr. E, where Dr. Michael Easley answers your biblical or theological questions in 10 minutes or less. Today's question comes from Lisa. She writes, "Hi, friends. Knowing divisions in the church displeases the Lord. What are your thoughts about the quote-unquote sharp disagreement between Paul and Barnabas? How should it have been handled?" I love that. It's like the Bible talks about it, but how should they have handled this?
No comment. Next question.
Well, but that's even a good starting point of the Bible. The text isn't always prescriptive. Sometimes it's descriptive, Anyway,
Good job. Good job.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
And as we often talk about, don't ask the Bible questions it doesn't answer.
Right.
Don't ask it how to fix your lawnmower. Don't,
Right.
whatever. All right. So Acts chapter 15,
Yeah.
38 to 40, Paul kept insisting that they should not take him along who had deserted them in Pamphylia. This is John Mark, and had not gone with them to the work. And there occurred such a sharp disagreement that they separated from one another. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and left, being committed by the brethren to the grace of the Lord. Now, that word sharp disagreement is paroxysmos. Paroxysmos. Only used twice in the New Testament. Here and in Hebrews 10:24, where we're to provoke one another, not forsaking the assembly, but provoke one another.
Okay.
So the idea is, so if you have a child that has asthma, they have a paroxysmal where they can't breathe. It's an attack. It's a sharp thing, and that's the word. So it's interesting that that's the word we have in the New Testament about Paul and Barnabas. So John Mark had failed in some way. He deserted them in Pamphylia, and that's recorded in Acts chapter 13:13. It doesn't tell us what he did or why he did it, but it was enough to irritate Paul.
Paul got annoyed.
Barnabas, remember, his character was the son of encouragement. He sold land and helped the church. He was Paul's voice to get him in the front door, so to speak. Barnabas is a wonderful, encouraging guy. And he has, let's just hypothetically say, more compassion or patience with John Mark. Paul is a directive guy, lead, follow, get out of my way. Perhaps we're reading too much into the story. But what I find interesting is not how should they have handled it. I find interesting is this is how the missionary effort was broken into two.
Interesting.
And if you go back to the book of Acts, the Lord told them to stay in Jerusalem until such a time as he came, and then they were to go Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and the remotest part of the earth, Acts 1:8. Well, they don't do that.
Right.
And so he persecutes the church.
Yeah.
And they scatter. And the word scatter is a word play on sowing seed.
Yes.
And so Philip stands by, everybody else goes out. Paul, of course, does these missionary journeys. And so one could argue ostensibly that even though on the human level it was a sharp disagreement, it worked for the gospel. And later on, it's almost kind of funny, but it says Paul finds John Mark useful to send John Mark to help me later on in the storyline in Galatians chapter 2. So whatever the disruption was, and they parted company, I would say the sharp disagreement wasn't biblical.
Sure.
It wasn't, I'm guessing, wasn't theological. It was about his not being a faithful disciple. Right. He didn't do what he's supposed to do.
He wasn't 100% in, so he's out.
Yeah. And Paul writes about Demas, having loved this world, departed me.
Yeah.
He's a tenacious guy.
Yeah.
And Barnabas, we might conclude, was more compassionate and empathetic and work with him. But more importantly, the missionary work continues. Now, how do you apply that local church conflict? I don't think you can. I think it's apples and oranges. I think we're given insight into the humanity of saints, first century and modern century. Saints are sinners. We're selfish. We're proud. We're arrogant. We have disagreements over non-biblical things. If it's a disagreement over the Bible, that's one thing. But if it's preference versus biblical, it gets a little more complex at times.
Right.
I find it interesting. Romans 12:18 is a passage I've had to tell myself many, many times, if possible, so far as it depends upon you, be at peace with all men.
Yep.
And that if possible is the first condition. It's not always possible.
Yep.
Insofar as it depends upon you.
Right.
What do you do to be at peace with all men? But I don't know about you, but I've had a host of conflicts in local church ministry over the years. Some are proud on my point. Some are dogged determination. Some are biblical.
Right.
Some are, this isn't wise.
Yeah.
This is foolish.
Right.
And, leadership makes decisions that aren't always right, aren't always perfect. That's why you hopefully have a plurality of leaders in a local church. But sometimes there's a groupthink, and on it goes. We're fallen people in a fallen context, and there's always going to be trouble.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I have any help for Lisa. I don't, other than to say, if possible, so far as it depends upon you.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not possible.
I think the thing that I take to heart from this passage is it's an example of what man meant for evil, God meant for good. And again, not that they were being evil in this or whatever, but just like, this is not ideal. We shouldn't, as believers, I mean, it's unfortunate that Barnabas and Paul got in a fight and had to depart. But God, to your point, God used that. And so, I mean, my jump was, okay, when I'm praying through something and I've got, there's a situation over here and I'm doing what I can do to create peace and whatever. If we're at a standstill, then maybe my application is my prayer shifts and just says, God, use this for your good.
Another thing comes to mind was when the Galatians 2 reference was not to John Mark. Galatians 2 reference is to Paul opposing Peter in public. He opposed him to his face, it says.
Oh, wow.
Because Peter was teaching some wrong things.
Yeah.
So here's two apostles.
Totally.
And Peter apparently...
And Peter's like the better apostle or the...
Well, he was handpicked where, Paul is still handpicked, but in a very different situation. Well, he's handpicked, but in a different situation. He didn't have the same exact experience. We won't get into the qualifications of an apostle. He is an apostle. Yeah. But he came later than Peter. Yeah. And he spent a lot more time before he becomes an apostle to the Gentiles. But point being, here's a apostle arguing with another apostle and correcting him for his errors. Yeah.
And just to clarify, John Mark here is not Mark the gospel writer.
Correct. Different.
Do we know anything about this John Mark?
Thank you for asking that. No.
I was just listening to an episode another podcast about conversation, and they were talking about gotcha questions. And it would be like, you're like, oh, I'm a theologian, and I have this whatever. I'm like, well, tell me who this person. That's a gotcha. Yeah, I didn't mean that to be.
Sure.
I didn't mean it to be a gotcha.
No, we actually don't know much about him.
Well, here's the deal. There's so many.
Actually, I don't know much about him.
Probably both are true. Tyler and I went on this rabbit trail the other day about all the Marys in the Bible, and I was like, doing this whole comedy sketch of like, wait, that was the Mary that had, but everyone has the same name. It just gets complicated. Anyway, okay, sorry, Lisa. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, let me land it again. Sadly, it's not always possible. If possible, so far as it depends upon you, be at peace with all men.
Yeah.
There are people in my life I am not at peace with.
Yeah.
And, they might say I'm proud and stubborn, and they're probably true. But at the same point, if you're right and you're doing it lovingly and firmly and all the above, and people don't, what are you going to do? So it's a hard tension. We're sinful people, and we're fallen in a fallen context.
At the very front of her question, she says, knowing divisions in the church displease the Lord. Yeah. Do you think that's always true?
I know what she means by that, but to your answer clinically, no. Because if there is a dissension over doctrine,
they're saying something behind the pulpit
if there's a dissension, and what I'm working with a number of churches right now in the country that are divided over some non-biblical issues:
baptism, communion,
age, membership. This one church discussion, one room, one building. A number of churches are sorting through this. I was with a group of 12 pastors the other night, and we were talking about some of these issues that they have encountered. They're not biblical. Yeah. I have this theory. We're way off, but I have this theory. When a church is arguing about infrastructure, about polity, they're not effectively evangelizing or discipling. Yikes. You give me people that say, I, me, my when I go to church versus write 3 names of non-Christian friends that and we're going to pray for those people for 90 days.
Yeah.
Between now and 90 days, have coffee with one of them.
Yeah.
And just get to know them.
Right.
And if God opens the opportunity, say, tell me about your background.
Yeah.
Were you raised in a church? What did
Yeah.
you believe?
Yeah.
If people would get off the internal issues of a church
Yeah.
and focus on discipleship, outreach, evangelism,
Yeah.
this stuff goes away.
Wow.
This stuff goes away. But when you're internal with staffing and polity and policies, and we've never done that in precedents and changing your doctrinal statement and changing your statement of faith and trying to engage the culture,
Yeah.
you're off mission.
Right.
You get back to discipleship, sharing Christ, focusing, training people. How hard is it to pray for, I can't share the gospel? Fine. Let's just pray for 3 or 4 of your neighbors. Just pray for them for
Yeah.
the next 3 months.
Yeah.
Lord, I really want Joe and Susan to know Christ.
Yeah.
I'd like to have a conversation with them. Help me to have that coffee. See what God would do.
If you do that, all 3 of them will show up I guarantee, on your front porch with a problem or a question or something that God is opening the door every time.
And love them and be kind and be patient and share Jesus with them. And you never know what might happen.
Yeah.
But get off. And this is, again, this is 40 plus years looking through the rearview mirror. If only we'd have been outward focused and not just trying to infrastructure the church with programs and ministries and staff and budgets and policies. Oh,
Wow. All right.
sorry for the rant, folks.
Well, if you've got a question for Dr. E, call us, text us, email us. The info's in your show notes, and we'll see you next week.
And we might even answer the question.
Sometimes we do. Sometimes.